Welcome to an all-new episode of Get Lit with Lianna, the podcast. Join me as I sit down with a new guest author in each episode to discuss their books, careers, and everything in between. Today I'm joined by author Georgia Hunter to chat about her book, We Were the Lucky Ones, which was recently adapted into a TV series on Hulu and Disney Plus. Not only is she a New York Times bestselling author for this book, but she also took on a pretty big role in the development of the screen adaptation by being a co-executive producer as well as a writer on the show. This book and this TV series could be some of my favorite pieces of media that I've consumed this year. As a Jewish person living in the post-October 7th world, hearing stories of the Holocaust, stories of survival, of resilience, have never felt more powerful and impactful than they do right now. The fact that this is an insane story of survival, a true story that Georgia discovered by doing a school project in her teens, and then turned into this discovery of a family history she never knew about, is so amazing and so unbelievable. I absolutely loved getting to chat with her today to learn about how this book came to be, what this discovery of this family story was like, and then, of course, the process in adapting it for the screen. We talked all about the casting, a lot of pre-production stories, and what she's hoping audiences take away from this incredible series and book. This is one of my favorite episodes I've ever recorded. I felt like I was on the brink of crying the entire time. So I really hope you enjoy this episode and you find it as moving as I did. And if you have not yet read We Were the Lucky Ones or watched the series on Hulu or Disney Plus, you must. Without further ado, my conversation with the incredible Georgia Hunter starts right now. Welcome, Georgia Hunter, to the podcast. I am so excited to have you here. I am obsessed with your book, We Were the Lucky Ones. It truly has left the most, I don't even know, mark on my heart. I, as a Jewish person, as someone who loves books about resilience and just defeating the odds, this book was absolutely incredible. But I'm not going to lie or say something that isn't true. I watched the TV show before I read the book, which is something I typically do not do. And the reason why, how this came to be was my husband was out of town for work for a few days, and I typically don't get TV time when he's home because he's always watching some sort of sport. And I've just been falling super behind on everything TV, and I've really just been reading a lot lately. And he was gone, and I was watching New Girl on Disney, and I noticed that We Were the Lucky Ones was added to Disney in Canada because I think we were a little bit behind with the Hulu and I was like, oh my gosh, I think I have to watch this. And 6 episodes or 7 episodes were up at the time. I forget. There was only 1 or 2 that were missing. And I binged it in one night from 5 p.m. to 2 a.m., which honestly, I don't know if I recommend for people because it was so heavy. I was a snotty, swollen mess, but it was truly one of the most incredible television series I've ever seen. And then I was I need to read the book just to see how it compares and how it was adapted. And it was so perfectly done. So I have so many questions about the writing process, obviously, and then the adaptation, knowing your involvement. But first, before we talk about all that, I would love to know the background. I know you've done a lot of interviews about the story and your family story, but I've been trying to avoid them because I just want to have an authentic conversation with you. But I know that this is a true story. It's your family story. And I would love to know, how old you were when you first heard it, how it kind of, came to you. Is this something you knew forever growing up, that your family survived the Holocaust in this way? I would love to know how this happened.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me on. I'm so excited to be here today with you. And thank you for the kind words. I think that kind of feedback, it literally fills my heart up. So it makes me so happy. It was very, daunting to put the book out there. First of all, it's such a personal story and I held on to it. I kept it close for so long. So that was my first leap of faith. And then putting the show out there as well, it's you just never know how it's going to resonate with people. And I felt the magic of the production on set. And so it's really, really nice to hear that a little bit of that translated for you at least. But yeah, interestingly, if you kind of go back in time, it is not a story. It's entirely based on my family history. So Addie, who you meet in chapter 1 of my book, and you meet the whole family around the table at Passover. We ended up starting the show about a year earlier than the book starts. Addie's my grandfather. I was very, very close with him and my grandmother, Caroline, who you meet toward the end of the series. I grew up in a little town in Massachusetts called Plainville, southeastern Mass, and they lived a mile away. So I was with them all the time, meals and birthdays and holidays. But my grandfather never talked about the fact that he was born and raised in Poland and in the Jewish faith, and that he came from this big family of Holocaust survivors. It just wasn't a part of our dialogue. And to this day, I wish I could have asked him why, or maybe just asked him some questions about his experience, because I really don't think it was a deep, dark secret that he was keeping from me. And I'm an only child, so it wasn't like I even had a sibling to be like, hey, what's up with, Papa's accent? I can kind of hear a little accent. What's going on with it? Or he's very resourceful. Why does he make everything in this house by hand? I just took all that stuff for granted. It was my normal, and I adored him. And he was so positive and forward thinking and charismatic. And I think, of all the siblings, he's one of 5. And he's the only one of his siblings to land in a little part of the world where there were not other Jews or other Poles, whereas the other siblings were in Sao Paulo or Rio or Chicago, starting in New York. So they were surrounded by the Jewish community. So they kept their faith and they passed that down to their children. My grandfather didn't. And my grandmother was a Presbyterian from South Carolina. So that might have had something to do with it, although I'm certain that she would have raised the kids in the Jewish faith if he had said so. And now I know that he would go back to Brazil, where many of the family lived and stayed for Passovers and things like that. He just wouldn't tell my mom and her siblings that that's why he was going. So I know the religion meant something to him, and he did keep it up probably internally. But he died when I was 14. And I actually just found the paper that I wrote. I was assigned in high school a project called an I search, before I stood for anything to do with Apple phones. And it was to go out and research a little bit about our ancestry and learn about your roots. And I wrote a paper, it's called Papa's Gift. And here it is. I found it the other day. In 1995, and I sat down and I interviewed my grandmother, and it was over the course of that hour-long interview that his story came to light. So I learned that he was one of 5. He came from this town called Rodham, that he was the only sibling living in France at the start of the war, and that he managed to get out of Europe on one of the last passenger ships sailing from Marseille, meant to take him to Rio. My grandmother was a little fuzzy on the details. She's like, I think it took a lot longer for him than he thought to get there, because he made some stops. And oh, by the way, he fell in love with a young Czechoslovakian refugee on the way. Luckily for me and for her, that didn't work out. But she said that he was engaged to be married. And then when he finally reached Brazilian soil, he lost complete touch with his family back in Europe. And at that point, I knew enough in my Holocaust studies that the odds were severely against that family. When I asked, well, how did they manage to survive? She said, like your grandfather, they didn't really talk about that time in their lives, even though she had met them and spent time with them. So I was left with a lot of curiosity and a lot of questions. No resentment or anger about not knowing, just a veil had been lifted. But I was 15, and into sports and school and boys. It wasn't like I obsessed over it or anything. But a few years later, I guess I had just graduated from college. My mother hosted what became the first of now have been every year or every other year a family reunion on her father's side. So Addie's her father. And she's one of 10 first cousins in that second generation. So she invited them all to our home in Massachusetts, and they all immediately came and they brought their kids. So I was meeting cousins of my generation for the first time, and they came from Israel and France and Brazil and Colombia and Switzerland and California, Vermont. It was the biggest hodgepodge of people you can possibly imagine, with 6 different languages being spoken and all different kinds of food being prepared and music. And it was beautiful. And I remember having so much fun. And one night of that reunion, I wandered out back to this little picnic table where my mom and her cousins were sitting, and they were telling stories about the war. And I actually just dug up the original VHS footage of one of the cousins thought to record some of the stories that were being told. And on my Instagram page and on the Hulu, We Were the Lucky Ones for Hulu Instagram page, we have some of the side-by-sides of like cousins telling the stories about their parents, or Felicia telling a story about herself. Felicia was a baby at the start of the war. And then the side-by-side with the scene from the show, which is like, if you had told me then that that was going to happen, I would like, mine would have been blown. But that's when I started hearing bits and pieces of sort of the greater Courts family story, but about the other siblings and what they like, how they managed to survive. And I realized they all had their paths to survival that were far flung, like literally across continents. You know, one cousin was sent to Siberia, to the Gulag, and that's where his father was sent there. His parents were sent there, and he was born in March in the dead of winter. And he talked about how his mother, Herta, said when he was a newborn, he'd wake up with his eyes frozen shut. That's how cold it was. And she would have to coax his eyes open with her breast milk, which clearly was a scene that stayed with me because that ended up in the book and in the series. But, you know, as a 21-year-old kid, you're sitting there like, wait, what? What did you just say? You know, and Anna talked about how her parents, Helena and Adam, hiked over the Austrian Alps to safety after the war. I heard about, you know, false IDs and an escape from the ghetto and a disguised circumcision. And the stories like just went on. And I remember thinking like, someone has to write these down. Like this is crazy that I'm hearing them for the first time and that no one's writing them down. And again, 21 years old, I was off to do some traveling into the real world, find a job. But I think that's when the idea was officially seeded, and I couldn't quite shake it. So it took me 8 years to get the courage, but I put the stake in the ground in 2008 and said, all right, I'm going to fly around the world and try to interview as many relatives as I can and try to collect these stories. And so that's what I did. And start to finish, before the book came out, it was a 9-year process. It was slow going, but it wasn't, I don't know. It began as an ancestry project, and it wasn't like, I'm going to write a book and it's going to have 7 storylines and it's going to be historical fiction. I had no idea. I'd never written a book before. I just wanted to get the story down. So I was doing that. I was trying to research sort of the historical aspects as well by reaching out to archives and ministries, magistrates, anywhere that might have a record. And I found some incredible, incredible records. And then also just like traveling in the family footsteps. No one had gone back to Poland. No one in the family, once they left, had any interest in going back. And I understood why with the history. But I wanted to go, and I wanted to stand in their footsteps and like look at their old address and their old home and walk the path they would have walked to the market, and then also travel through Eastern Europe in the paths they took to survive. So I did quite a bit of that as well with my husband, who came with me on all of my research travel. So those were the kind of like the oral histories, the external research, and then the travel kind of all came together over those 9 years to create what is now the book, We Were the Lucky Ones.
Absolutely wild. So just to go back a little bit, when you first heard the story about your grandfather from your grandmother, like at the time, did you know that you had Jewish ancestry, that you were Jewish? No.
I did not know. I was raised in the Unitarian Church. And again, I don't think my parents were keeping some secret from me either. It was just, nope, I didn't know. I certainly never had any sense that I came from a family of Holocaust survivors. And no, I mean, now, interestingly, when I think about it, like I kind of feel like I understand who I am and why I am the way I am. And I'm only a quarter Jewish, you know, like it's not like this huge piece of me but there's so much of my personality that I attribute to it. And it's sort of those quiet traits that were passed along through my grandfather, through my mom, that I'm like, oh yeah, I get it. But no, I had no idea.
Crazy. And had you had any like in school, like any like schooling about the Holocaust? Like, were you familiar with what? A little bit. Okay.
A little bit. Yeah.
Okay. Because I know like I'm Jewish, and I grew up Jewish, and I grew up going to private Jewish school. And from a very young age, we had like learned about the Holocaust, and we're very privileged to have a lot of Holocaust survivors come and meet with us and talk with us and share their stories, like firsthand oral history, which is incredible. A lot of people now will not have that opportunity just because so much time has passed. Not a lot of time has passed, but I'm just really curious, like at 14, 15, doing this project and finding out all of this information that like wasn't, I guess it was hidden, but unintentionally hidden. Like it's so common for Holocaust survivors to not talk about what they endured. And one of my best friends actually just did a really big project for her father's birthday, honoring his father, and his history through the war. And he also was a very, very private man, kept himself and didn't like to talk about what he went through. And she found like some archival footage that a museum had taken of him talking about his story. So I'm hearing more and more people like nowadays getting all this information and finding out so much about their family history that they maybe didn't know. So I'm wondering what that was like for you as a young girl to like come into all this information and kind of like how you managed to process it.
Yeah. I mean, it was certainly eye-opening, like shocking in the beginning. Again, not in a way that I felt like I had been like someone had like pulled a quick one on me, like I was just like, wow, wait, really? And then obviously as I set out and started uncovering the stories, and I have to say, like, I'm very, very grateful. I got the family's permission to do this, of course, before I started. And I reached out to everybody by email and I said, or, phone if I could, but like, would you be all right if I sort of took the helm here and tried to gather up all of our stories? And the resounding answer was yes, thank you. Oh my gosh, someone needs to do this. Glad it's you.
Right.
So I was met with that, as opposed to, you're right, a lot of survivors don't talk about it or don't want to talk about it, which is completely understandable. I feel like it almost falls into one or the other camps. Like, you're either like really grow up hearing about the stories or you really don't. And I just really didn't. And I think some of my cousins did. So I think it's like it scattered the whole family. Everybody had a very different experience. Everyone had their little slice of the pie, if you will. And so I just kind of went around pulling it together. And as I did, I experienced all the emotions of everything from anger and sadness and despair to the joy and the love and the laughter of the moments that were described about babies and romances and friendships formed and things like that. So it was a very emotional experience going through it. And interestingly, I was older when I set off to do it, but I looked back at my, the dates of when I was traveling and researching and trying to unearth the story. And I was the exact age of my grandfather at the start of the war when I set out to do the research, and then the exact age of my grandfather at the end of the war when the book came out. So I don't know, there's something about the life that, like, where I was in life. And again, I think because possibly I didn't grow up in the shadow of this or with a lot of resentment about it, I went into it really open-minded and with a whole lot of curiosity and just like kind of a clean slate. And it helps that our story has a happy ending. Like I don't know if I could have written it if half the family had survived. Like I don't know. I think I inherited that really positive outlook, glass half full trait that my grandfather passed down, and I see everything. I don't know. I tackle life with a lot of energy and a lot of positivity, and it would have been very, very difficult. And it was difficult many times because of the subject matter itself, period. You can't research the Holocaust without feeling the weight of that. And all of a sudden that number, 6 million, becomes very real when you're looking at it through one family or through that human lens. And all of the family, all of the siblings, spouses lost family. Like some of them lost all of their family, except for maybe one sister or one brother. And so I was constantly trying to think about how to do the family story justice while honoring what was happening all around them. And I think we thought a lot about that in the show too. And there's a scene at the end where we light a candle and list people's names who were not at the table. And that was so important to me in the book and so important in the series as well. So yeah, I would just say, I think it's something, it was always a part of my DNA, but the process of unearthing it also sort of changed me as a person. And that was all in, 2008, 2017. And then again, picking it up and this being my life for the last 4 years from pitch to the writer's room to like reliving it all in the last few years and seeing it come to life visually has changed me again. So I think I'm going to be processing it for a very long time.
I would love to talk about the adaptation of the book.
Yeah.
It is so honest. The show is so honest to the book, but obviously there are some changes. I know you mentioned before that the show starts a year before the book does, which just helps, I think, and I'm sure this was the purpose because this is what I got out of it, but just to show like the family and how they were a family just living normal lives. The book really starts at the beginning of the war and you kind of don't get a taste of what their normalcy looked like. But I'm curious about some of those other changes. I mean, I know like Helena's character took on a lot of the stories from other characters in the book, and obviously, like her relationship with Adam is very different in the book than it is in the TV series. So I'm wondering about those creative changes and your involvement kind of in the actual adaptation from page to screen.
Yeah, I'm so lucky in that when I the book came out and then about a year later, my dear friend Tommy Kale called, and Tommy's I've known actually Robert, my husband met Tommy in summer camp. So I met Robert in college, 19 years old. I probably was just about that age when I met Tommy. So I've known him like 25 years or something crazy like that. And we've cheered for each other in our respective careers forever. And he's been a really fun one to cheer for because he's had
For
such
sure.
a and like more importantly, he's just one of the more amazing humans I know, just the kindest, most thoughtful, brilliant minded people I know. So when he called and said, "Hey, pal, how would you like to partner up and try to bring your story to the screen?" It feels like something we'd have a lot of fun doing together and no more important time than now to do this. And I said, "Yeah, absolutely. That was a dream come true." And he said, "How involved would you like to be? You can be kind of step back and watch it unfold, or you can be involved every step of the way." And I like raised my hand. I was like, "Every step of the way, please." This is once in a lifetime. And I don't, first for me being on a TV set and being in the writer's room, but and the first day in the writer's room, we had 6 incredible writers working on these 8 episodes. I was like, I can be in here as little or as much as you guys want me to, but I can be your backboard. I can find you source materials. I didn't miss 1 hour of the room. Like I was in that room every day for 5 months, for 5 hours a day. They were like, "You may not leave." They were like, and I just didn't want them to feel any pressure. Like if we did, like we did, we dialed up the romance between Helena and Adam a little bit. And that's like, I didn't want them to feel any awkwardness or pressure. Like maybe my grandfather has a sex scene that wasn't in the book. Like I just didn't want them
Yeah.
to feel anything. And it was all so easy working with this group of incredible writers. They're the most, oh my gosh, I love them so much. They've made me into a better writer. And they're just like, they all brought a piece of their own story to the scripts and to the characters they were bringing to life, these relatives they were bringing to life on the screen. So yeah, every step of the way, I was there for the pitch, and we pitched it back in 2019, actually before COVID, and didn't get picked up. And then pitched it again during COVID, and for some reason, perhaps the fact that we had to do it on Zoom and we were all apart from our loved ones and kind of living in that baseline of fear, isolation, Hulu did pick it up right away, and yeah, it was off to the races with writing and the pre-production and building sets, building our cast, which was incredible. And so I feel like, as a 45-year-old woman now, like my learning curve just like went like this. Like I got to do this thing that was absolutely just mind-blowingly well done, and like the best possible people came to this project. And I think that's one of Tommy's most incredible skills is he attracts the person who wants to be there, that they raise their hand and they say, "I would like to be there." And that's how we felt with everybody from top down. um, so yeah, I would say, the challenge was we have what is it, like 420-page book, and how do you turn that into 8 hours of content? So there were some scenes we had to skip or combine, Helena and Franca crossing a river versus uh, just Bella crossing over from German to Russian occupied Poland at the start of the war. We combined those 2 scenes. And I wish we could, I wish that's probably one thing. I wish we could have done both, but like from a budget standpoint and timeline standpoint, it was just too much. Also, Joey was down, by the way. She was like, "I will cross a river in the middle of January for us." And we were like, "You're amazing, but we're not going to make you do that."
Yeah.
And we started it in 1938. In the book, I have the luxury of backstory and reflection and memories. So you get into my grandfather's head a lot in the early pages, but you can't do that as much on the screen. So I loved the fact that we brought that family together around the Passover table. And I think one of my favorite scenes in that first sequence in the pilot is after the Passover, and they're just kind of lounging in one of the bedrooms and kind of making fun of each other and smoking cigarettes and talking smack a little bit. And like, it just felt so real to me. And I think that was one of my biggest like takeaways when I started watching these incredible actors embody the relatives. Like I had imagined it for so long. That's what you do as a writer. You imagine yourself stepping into their shoes, but watching it and seeing how real it felt, and that that human interaction, the sibling interaction, the parents with the siblings, the mothers and the daughters, like it was just that bowled me over right from the very get-go. And so yeah, I'm trying to think of, I mean, there were a few changes we had to make just again, like just to fit all the content in, like, but I am still like, I'll go back and watch episodes and I can write down 250 things that are exactly as they were in the book, that are exactly as they were told to me. Even if it's like a line from Adam, like he's describing the way he designs as an architect. He says, I try to design free of untruths. And that's a line that was passed down to me from his son, and that ended up in the book and now in the show. And props were the same. Like if we didn't have much because the family was carrying what they could on their body as they were trying to move around and survive. But like my grandfather had a snakeskin wallet that he kept. And so the props team recreated that exact wallet. And not just that, but they put all the paperwork that he had in there, which was like 17 documents trying to get out of Europe, all the things that were required, a signature for him to leave. And no one ever sees those in the show, but they're in there and they're folded up and they're what my grandfather was carrying. Or like a brooch of my great grandmother Nahuma's, and a little Easter egg for you guys. They recreated that for Robin Weigart, who plays her for the show. And then my mother had a little cameo in the finale, and she wore the real one in that episode. And she's like standing behind Logan, who plays my grandfather, in a scene where he's waiting for a boat to come in. And you can see, if you look at her, she's in this beautiful costume and she's wearing like the real brooch that my grandmother Nahuma once wore. So like every little detail and commitment to authenticity was honored every single step of the way. And not just like story wise, but like where people's minds were. It was so overwhelming for me. Like being in the writer's room was overwhelming. It was like a giant therapy session. There were so many teachers. And I mean, like the conversations, because we had to like step it back and go deeper than I ever did with the writing of the book. But on set, I would have like, whether it was someone from hair and makeup, or, the person in charge of moving vehicles, or the photographer, one by one over the course of the shoot, people would come up to me and just say like, George, I just want to say thank you for bringing us this project and trusting it with us. Like, we don't often get projects like this that are so real. And the fact that you're here and like you're related, and it's like this, it's a really powerful thing. Like, this is why we make television. So thank you. And I just remember being like, no, thank you. Like, this is, you guys have taken this into your hearts. And they're like, well, we just want to do it justice. We just want to do it justice. So, I mean, that I couldn't ask for anything more than that. Like, that was the resounding theme from start to finish. And, even though, yeah, a few things were changed for time and chronology and that type of thing, the way we held true to the story was just remarkable.
It must have been like so absolutely surreal being on set and seeing these absolutely incredible actors. Like, this cast is phenomenal. Someone who like has watched quite a bit of like Israeli television also, like having some of these incredible Israeli actors paired with these fabulous North American like the cast in and of itself is so impressive. Like, the resumes of these actors is just beyond. And then seeing the way that they embody like your family, like I really can't imagine what it was like being on set and like seeing basically your family come to life in a way that like nobody gets this experience ever. And like I had goosebumps watching it. I have goosebumps talking to you about it now. Like, it is the most surreal, remarkable thing. And I cannot imagine what that was like for you to like, not only as the writer of this story, but like as a grandchild of this family, like to be watching this. And I'm so curious to know, like, during the casting process, like obviously for like Joey and Logan, but like for all of the characters, like, were there moments where you were like 100% this is them? Like, what was the casting process like for you, kind of being related to these real people? Like, how much say did you have? Did you have any say? Like, I would love to know about the casting piece, because it was so well done. And I imagine as authentic to the truth as possible.
Absolutely. And I shout out to our casting director, Fiona Weir, out of London. She's unbelievable. Like, the fact, it is no small task, right? To find, we have 12 leads, 12. right? And they have to all feel like family or a spouse. So they have to either really feel like a family or feel like maybe not a part of the family, but a spouse. And so, and then children, we had many baby Felicias. We had a 3-year-old Felicia and a 9-year-old Felicia. So it was, I don't know how she did it. And Tommy always says, like, look, when I go to cast, and I think that's one of his biggest strengths as well. He's like, I take my time. And so on this show, we took about a third more time. So we took like a lot more time to cast than we need to, but he's like, I know it will be worth it in the long run. And it was. Casting is not something that like I feel like is my forte. Like I don't know how to do it. I absolutely watched every tape of every audition. And when it got down to the last few, I would, voice an opinion if I had one, but I trusted so deeply that the decisions that were being made by Fiona and Tommy and Erica and the team. I will say when it came to my grandmother, that was one that I was a little bit not nervous about, but I was like, all right, I want to really weigh in on this one because I knew her. She lived to almost 100 and she was like one of my best friends and caretakers as a kid. And like, just, I adored her and spent a lot of my life with her. So I was like, let's get, we got to get them all right. But like, I really want to weigh in on this one. So when Nicole Bloom came across, I was just like, oh my God, it's perfection. It's perfection. So yeah, I was involved in that. Like I gave big thumbs up because by the time I saw them, there had been many weeded out and we were down to like a few, and it was weird. Yeah, they had to do chemistry reads over Zoom. And I remember being worried about that because you're right. A third of our cast is Israeli, a third is British, and a third is American. So there wasn't time to be in a room together. But like, our Jacob and Bella, like Amit and Eva are just like I can't even, I think about them and I start crying about like their love that they share. Yeah. Henry and Mohan, Genek and Herta, Joey and Alex, or Sam Wolf. I mean, just like it's perfect. I don't know. I'm biased, but I was so pleased with how and where we ended up. And again, this cast was another example of how they took it so seriously and to heart. And they all also brought parts of their own family stories to the roles. And I should mention they're all Jewish. That was another decision that we made, was to cast an entirely Jewish cast, except for my grandmother, because in real life she wasn't. But yeah, and it was really fun hearing them like tell stories about their childhoods, or like Michael Aloni hums a lullaby to little baby Felicia before he leaves. That was a lullaby that his mother used to sing to him. So like we were so open to that, which was really cool.
And like from start to finish, how long did you guys film for?
It was about a 9-month process. We filmed most of it in around Bucharest, Romania. And then we went over to Spain, to the Malaga region, to Cadiz, on the coastline. So anytime there was a coast or like a downtown Rio, it was filmed in Spain. And that was kind of a nice way to end. It was like the weather turned nice, and
yeah, for sure.
we were on the beaches, and they were hard scenes to shoot, some of them, but we did a lot of exteriors and on location shoots there.
Incredible. So obviously the show came out around March and now we're in July. So it's been out for a few months, but I would love to know like what the reception has been to this series. I mean, I know like from my friends, we've all watched it. We've all really, really resonated with it, especially being Jewish in a post-October 7 world. Like seeing this story right now and all of these Holocaust miniseries that are coming out, it's at such an insane time to be rewatching this, because of how like raw and like similar our lives feel at this time. So I'm just wondering what the reception has been like, and it kind of is pretty serendipitous and crazy that it came out so soon after all this has happened, and kind of in a perfect way. I feel like this is something that Jewish people really do want to watch right now, especially a story of survival in so much darkness and in so much hate. So I'm curious to know like what all of that has been like for you as the author of this book, but also being so involved in the television series.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. And if you told me like in 2008, when I first set off to like dig up the story, that we would be here today, like launching the show in this moment in time, like I don't think I would have believed you. It's certainly like it's it's raw. That's a really good word. It's timely. It's impossible not to see the parallels. I guess the feedback that I've gotten is very similar to what you've just told me, and that like, especially from all audiences, but Jewish audiences especially, that like, thank you for bringing us this story now. We need stories of hope and inspiration, and I think across the board too, I get really excited when I hear from like younger audiences, like teenagers, young adults who are watching it and describing it as like, wow, I it just felt so real, so human. And I think what it is like, by telling the story through the eyes of this family and the hearts and minds, like you're literally like only seeing what they're seeing. We don't know how the story ends because we're seeing it through their eyes, and they don't know how the story ends. You like, when you step into someone's shoes like that, you begin to like relate in a way that you can't just by reading about it, some, a moment in time, and an unfathomable moment in time for many, and also scarily a moment in time a lot of kids don't even know about these days. Like, the statistics there are terrifying. So the fact that we possibly are reaching a younger generation and allowing them to relate and to feel some empathy, I think, to me, that's what fills me up with hope, is that the world needs more empathy right now. And if we can bring a little bit of that by letting people relate to these characters who are real people and really experience this, and it's like really incredibly important time in their lives, like they're all kind of coming of age throughout this, like and they're just an ordinary family too. Like, it's not like they are some, crazy military family, or, yeah, I just think, because they're from a town most people haven't heard of, there's a big family, they've all got their usual sibling rivalries and dynamics, and you watch their lives just get completely turned upside down, and it's impossible not to ask yourself, like, well, what would I have done? And so I think when we start doing that, we build a little bit of empathy. And I think if we can bring some of that right now in this day and age, as hard as it is to put it out there, like, it was perfectly timed and also crazy, like, it was just like, wait, we're putting this out now. Wow. Okay. And to be honest, it was nerve-wracking going in front of the media, because we were getting asked a lot of questions, and it was never our agenda to make some sweeping political statement. Literally, it was our whole goal was to tell a family story. A story, Tommy likes to say, it's a story about a family that just wants to come together around a dinner table again. Like, it really is that. And it's set to the backdrop of this horrific time in history. And it's impossible not to see the parallels. But I think I appreciate that people can take from it what they will. And I hope some of that is like some hope and inspiration and some empathy.
Incredible. Well, we'll leave it at that.
Okay.
Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me. I honestly could speak to you for another 3 hours.
Oh, it's so fast.
On the show. Like, I think I think about it all the time, and I'm like making everyone watch it. Like, I was just back home in Montreal with my parents. My parents haven't watched it yet. I was like, what are you waiting for? Like, everyone needs to be watching this show, and everyone needs to read your book. And I'm just like so grateful to have had you here. And thank you so much for sharing your family story. I know it's not a unique story, but it's definitely a really remarkable and a really special one. And like, I don't know, I just like would love to like meet you someday and like hug you. Like, I'm just like so grateful for you for sharing this. So thank you so much for taking the time. This was like so special and so meaningful to me. So thank you.
Thank you. I'll never get tired of talking about it, and I hope we can hug it out someday.
Would love that.